Hi, this is Brock Dickinson, and I'm coming to you today from Amherst, New York, from the campus of the University at Buffalo. I wanted to talk a little bit today about tariffs and what's going on the American side of the border when it comes to tariffs. And I think there's a number of interesting things that we can sort of take a look at that give us some insights into what the impact of the tariff discussion is on the U.S. side of the border. So as I drove across into New York State from Ontario this morning, I crossed the border at Niagara Falls. And the fascinating thing to see, that's one of the busiest tourism-related border crossings in the world. And as I drove up to U.S. Customs with its 17 lanes of traffic, only 2 of those lanes were open, and yet I didn't have to wait. There were 8 cars in the line to cross the border, most of them with American license plates. And so one of the first things that we see in terms of the U.S. impact of tariffs is the dramatic decrease in the number of Canadians spending time and spending money in the U.S. as tourists. Now, there are a number of estimates about what this decrease in the tourism spending will mean in the longer run. In the average year, about 21 million Canadians visit the United States every year, and they spend about $21 billion. And so there are suggestions that even a 10% decrease in the level of tourism spending in the United States could have huge economic developments and economic impact implications. If just 10% of Canadians stay away, that suggests a $2.1 billion reduction in tourism spending and puts about 140,000 U.S. tourism jobs at risk. Based on what I saw at the border this morning, the decrease in tourism is going to be a lot greater than 10%. We're looking at a 50% or greater reduction as this unfolds, which suggests that the impact in tourism alone of this trade war is going to be measured in the tens of billions of dollars. Now, that's kind of significant because it comes on the heels of a whole series of other tariff implications that also have negative repercussions on the American economy. So since the beginning of the year, we've seen approximately $6 trillion in stock market value wiped out by decreases, declines on the stock markets across the United States. And so we can start to put a price tag on what tariffs mean to the American economy. Now, the fascinating thing about a decline in the scale of $6 trillion is that when you look at the rationale that President Trump has been proposing for the whole tariff regime in the first place, one of the arguments that's been made is that this generates a whole new series of revenues for the U.S. government and takes the pressure off the American taxpayer. And those estimates are based on the very rosy projections that tariffs could generate about $3 trillion a year in income. Well, if we've already seen $6 trillion wiped out of the economy, plus we're starting to see the impacts in areas like tourism, that $3 trillion suddenly doesn't look as impressive as it might have several months ago. The other side of this really points to one of the key weaknesses of the whole tariff model in the first place. So when a government like the United States imposes tariffs on imports from a place like Canada or Mexico, essentially what they're doing is raising the prices of the goods that they're importing. That 25 or 50% tariff really leads to an increase in the price of the commodity or the good or the service that's being imported into that market. And it means the price for everything in the tariffing country begins to rise. This is likely to drive inflation in that country. So if the U.S. is imposing tariffs on goods coming into the United States, it means that the cost of goods rises, and this accelerates the growth of inflation. Now, there is a rationale for this from an economic development perspective, because if the price of things rises and those things are coming from outside the country, then it opens up space within the domestic market to build new capacity, to build new manufacturing operations, to start new ventures and new companies, to replace the expensive goods that are coming in from outside of the country. But the reason that opportunity exists is because the prices have risen so much. It creates space for new ventures and new entrants into the marketplace to launch ventures that are going to sort of meet that demand. As those foreign goods become more expensive, it means that American makers can now compete to make those same kinds of goods. And that they have that extra 25% cushion to sort of get their venture started and to make sure that they can be profitable. That has 2 impacts. The first is that it means that the inflation that came with tariffs becomes a permanent thing, because now those new ventures rely on the margin from the tariffs in order to be profitable themselves. It's the tariff increase that actually makes it possible for those goods to be manufactured in the States or for those services to be offered. And therefore, it perpetuates and entrenches and cements the price increase that came along with the tariffs. So inflation goes up, but it does not come down as domestic capacity increases to meet the demand for new American-made products. The second aspect of this is that if I'm relying on those tariffs to create $3 trillion a year in income for the American government, and I'm going to sort of change my tax structures so I'm less reliant on income tax and more able to use those tariff revenues to kind of offset that income tax, then I don't want that domestic manufacturing capacity to emerge in the first place. If I create a system that relies on $3 trillion in tariffs, I don't want the tariffs to go away. If I see domestic manufacturing rise to take the place of those foreign imports, then what I'm really suggesting is that I'm going to see a dramatic decline in tariff-related revenues. And if I've restructured the tax system to rely on those tariffs, suddenly I've lost that income as well. So there is kind of a sense at the heart of the tariff strategy that's been adopted by the Trump government that this will both generate revenue and increase domestic capacity for manufacturing and other industries in the United States. And the reality is, from an economic perspective, it's impossible for it to do both. It can do one or the other, but it can't achieve both. And when we add that to the sort of the realities of $6 trillion losses in the markets and a rapid decline in major industries like the tourism sector, we can imagine that at some stage pretty quick, this whole tariff approach is going to start to become very unpopular. And in fact, recent polling shows that of all the things that Trump has done since he became president of the United States, the least popular amongst American voters is the tariff situation. The introduction of tariffs is less popular than Doge. It's less popular than mass deportations. It's less popular than the price of eggs. There's a growing sense that this is pushing America in the wrong direction. And so it's not just Mexicans and Canadians that are saying, let's rethink this little thing. It's increasingly Americans themselves.